You are about to watch Saving Clayton, a journey of courage and a continued fight for justice. It is a culmination of 18 months of investigative journalism, filming, and editing, the journey of the Woolley family. We believe it has allowed them to tell their side of the story and bring attention to their fight for justice. In a world where truth is often shrouded in shadows, Elavium stands as a beacon of light. Whether it's injustice or corruption, you will find us all over Oklahoma. We empower the voiceless and challenge the status quo. Support Elavium and become a part of the movement for truth. Together, let's illuminate Oklahoma.
Go. Blow it out.
No spitting. Look at me. Look at me. Can't find you. So bright. Okay. Gotcha. Go. 1, 2, 3. Oh!
All I want to do is see my son. That's what I've been fighting for this whole time, is to see my son.
They totally kidnapped him out of our family, out of his whole support system, and put him in foster care. And they were accusing us of things that didn't happen.
I happen to have two parents who they walked everything out that they taught me, that they were able to instill in me values that have been the foundation of everything in my life. And I've always said that that's like the best gift I've ever received in my life, is the foundation that I had in my upbringing. Everything they did was from this just profound love that just constantly carried me through my childhood. And I knew that, like, no matter what I went through in my life, because of that foundation of their profound love, I would be okay, because I knew that I had this strength that was instilled in me from that.
If I had to highlight like 3 pillars of our upbringing from our parents, it would, I would say self-sustainability was a very huge part. My parents were always very resourceful and sort of self-made, especially my mom. Another pillar would be our faith. My parents really wanted to be those individuals that modeled the expectations that they had for their children rather than just saying it. So they sort of modeled the same expectations that they wanted from us and modeled the same behavior that they had hope we would begin to take on. A third thing worth mentioning is that my parents were really big into instilling character qualities into us. They weren't too big into like the material possessions and the stuff like that. They would rather teach us how to make, create, or sustain something versus just handing it to us. We just didn't really have the money to just sort of buy and do things. So we had to be more resourceful in that way. But also they wanted us to learn to be problem solvers. My mother, especially being very resourceful, was a very self-made person. Designed the house that we lived in for 10 years where we 3 kids grew up the majority of our childhood. My mom designed it and my dad built it from the ground up. And it was really sort of this dream that my mom had that my dad really helped bring to life. And they sort of navigated and worked together as a couple and as a family. And we really saw that example growing up too. They really used that property to be an ability to tie and model and host a sense of community for us as a family and for the church. So they would have church potlucks out there, or the youth group. They would host the youth group at the bonfire or an event. They really wanted it to be a place of fellowship. So it was our home, but it was a place for community as well. And that was just something I grew up with from a very young age.
So Desiree, for a long time has struggled with substance abuse, and that all kind of started when she was 14.
Desiree and some of them were playing hide and seek in the dark with flashlights. Some of the boys were hiding in the barn holding the flashlights, and Desiree was trying to get into the barn because she could hear them in there. And so they attempted to try to scare her. So they jumped out of the barn with the flashlights in their hand, and one of the flashlights hit Desiree in the tooth and knocked her tooth out.
So he was innocent. I'm sure a lot of people have the same story in Oklahoma, especially. She was prescribed oxy from a dentist for chipped tooth, and it led from there. But ultimately, she struggled for a long time with substance abuse from that.
It was kind of a slippery slope that led to illegal drugs eventually.
So even after becoming pregnant with Clayton, my parents really wanted to still make sure that they were setting a great example for Desiree, and that, faith is the foundation of our life, and that no matter the choices you've made in the past or what's led you to this point, that the future can always be better. And so one thing that we did that really clearly demonstrated that was, my parents, they wanted to take us on a mission trip to Romania into the orphanages there. They always just have such a heart for other people that are struggling, and even in our own struggles as a family, still wanted to reach out to those struggling even more. So she had this big idea, and we were like, we don't know how we're going to make it happen financially, but we know that if it's God's plan, he's going to make a way for it, and he did.
Desiree was pregnant with Clayton at this time, so this was in high school. My mom developed this passion in her heart to step in and take action and maybe see if there was anything that we as a family could offer to these orphans in Romania. My dad is someone who really supports her in her dreams and sort of helps make them come true as well. And again, the resourceful aspect steps into this too, because we didn't really exactly have the money or the ability to just go to Romania and do whatever we wanted. My dad worked at the airport, and so he got free standby flight benefits, and those worked internationally as well. So we sort of booked this route with our family to go to Romania, and we had to loop through all these other countries, and it was kind of a mess to get there, and getting home was even worse. So we really saw these character qualities and this kind of do-it-yourself type mentality modeled by my parents. And I think that the three of us kids, in many ways, in different ways, sort of just began to see that unfold in our lives, even our adult lives now.
Ultimately, she struggled for a long time with substance abuse from that, and she decided when she had Clayton that it would be best for him to have the same wonderful upbringing that we were able to have, and she knew she couldn't provide at the time. And so that's what led her to giving him over to my parents and giving them custody.
I think she really came to the mature decision that it was better for my parents to step in and start helping raise Clayton with the principles that they had raised her and my sisters with and done their best with at that time. She really knew that that was their heart and that that was their ability because she experienced it firsthand herself.
He's part of a family that stepped in as that parental role when I didn't. When I chose negative things in my life. And even when I was changing those negative things in my life, I still had them supporting me through taking care of him and helping him and giving him a really firm foundation.
Five-year-old grandson had a t-ball game, so we went there, and then and Glory met us. She had rugby practice nearby, so afterwards we met for dinner. Then we went home. We were running behind schedule. I had the baby with me. The baby had been acting like he had allergies, teething, had a low-grade fever, so we were really watching him.
He wasn't feeling good. We thought he was teething. I've seen a lot of babies not feel good when they're teething. He was very different that day. So much so that we tried different things to keep him happy and even documented behavior on my phone.
Now watch if I stop.
The night before, Elijah was not feeling super well, and he was super fussy, and he had a low fever and was drooling a lot. So, teething is usually when they're drooling a lot and they have a low fever. That's usually teething. So we're like, okay, no worries. He's just got some teeth coming in and is just a little fussy, and it'll blow over.
Bill was really tired because he had just gotten home from work also at the airport, and so he was exhausted. And so I got Clayton ready for bed and took care of some other things, and Bill fed the baby, which he usually helped me out in the evening by feeding the baby. And the baby was just not eating very vigorously. And because he'd been constipated for a few days, we were starting to get concerned about that too, because constipation was a constant battle with him. And so we were pushing the fluids to help with that. So when I got done with the other stuff, I said, I'll take over, and I want to try to get him to take this whole bottle so that his fluids aren't low, because that will just aggravate the constipation. I finished feeding him, checked his diaper, and then got him ready for bed. I had a sleeper on, and then Clayton was already asleep by this time, and I went and I put him in the pack and play where he slept, and I put a white cotton mattress pad under him because he seemed like he was drooling a lot. And so I decided to let him sleep like that. And I didn't want him to like choke on drool or something like that. So I put that right on top of the sheet, and then put his Thomas the Train blanket on over his shoulders. And then that was it. Prayed for him and went out.
So that night, my parents put Elijah to bed, and I was in my room, and my room borders their room. So we shared one little thin wall between us, and both of the boys slept in that room. And I remember around I think it was around 10 p.m. maybe, I got out of my bed, and mind you, my dad was asleep. I remember my dad snores incredibly loud, and it just kind of shakes the whole house. And I remember just being geez, I remember acknowledging his loud snoring that night, and that he was asleep. And so I went back to my room, and again, anytime I'm in the hallway, I always listen to see if the boys are fussing, or if Elijah is fussing, or if Clayton's awake. Sometimes he's awake, as a 5-year-old would be. And so I just kind of listen to make sure, because my room is the one closest, in case I need to go in there and help or do anything. And mind you, I was up till 3 a.m., never heard anything abnormal. All I heard was my dad snoring the whole night. And then around 6, I got up and went to the gym. Got a call from my dad that was I need you to come home. And he said that one of our dogs had been sick, and my mom needed to take him to the vet, but that he needed to go take Clayton to the bus stop, my older nephew, and get to work. But Elijah was still sleeping.
My husband came and woke me up early and said, hey, you might want to look at the dog. It looks like he's taking a turn from the worst. He can barely lift his head. So I was just oh my gosh. We started to get Clayton ready for school. And I just rushed the dog down to the closest veterinarian, which is just down the road.
My dad didn't want to wake up the baby to take him to the vet to my mom, and just kind of wanted to let Elijah sleep it off. And so he asked me to come home so that he wasn't left alone.
And they, took him. I stayed with him for a little bit, and then I came back because Glory had to get ready for school and go.
And so I came home. My dad left to take Clayton to the bus stop and go to work, and my mom was at the vet.
I came back. I still had a few minutes. I sat in the driveway, called a few friends, and asked them for prayer for the dog. And then went in, and the baby usually slept till 9 or 10. Wasn't unusual, especially if he wasn't feeling well. And plus, he went to bed later than usual.
We knew it was teething, and we were okay, let him sleep, because when a baby's teething, or when they have been fussy or sick or whatever the day before, it takes so much out of them. So kind of just want to let them sleep it off. And as long as they'll stay asleep, you want to let them sleep. I
thought, well, if he's not up by 10, I'm going to go get him up, because I want to get these fluids going. So it was 1:45, 9:45. So I went and fixed his bottle, and I put in the laxative tea that we used in every bottle. And then I warmed it for him. He still liked it warm, even though he was a year old. So we just did it that way. I heard her go into Elijah's room, and she always does this thing when she went to wake him up, where she would always go,
is there a baby in there? And then she would creep a few steps closer and then say, is there a baby in there? And usually at that point, Elijah had been woken up by like the light coming on and the door opening. So he'd be awake and kind of giggling at that. And he just, I don't know, it was always a cute thing she always did. So I remember hearing her doing that and not getting a response. Like usually he would giggle or whatever. And she wasn't getting a response or babble back from him. And I just remember thinking like, oh, that's a little weird. And then I just heard her scream.
March 30th, 2018, 9. Brooktown on my nephew, he's not moving. He's not moving. Okay. What's the address?
As I approached the bed, I was startled because it looked like his body and everything was in the same position that I'd laid it the night before, and that never happens at that age. And the Thomas the Train blanket was still there, draped over his shoulders just like I left it. And so I reached for him and picked him up, and as soon as my hands were on him, in spite of the fact that he was wearing a few layers, I could feel the cold.
Threw my laptop off my lap and I sprinted in her room, and she was holding him, and she was like picking him up right as I walked in, and she was holding him, and she was like, call 911, call 911.
No, baby, okay, no. Listen to me. I'm sending the paramedics to help you now. Stay on the line. I'll tell you exactly what to do next.
I kept holding the baby's body, and she called 911, and then I tried to call Bill, and I think that call didn't go through or something. Anyway, he ended up calling back, I think.
So I was on the phone with the operator the whole time, and just kind of in a panic of what was happening, and none of it registering, and just trying to do whatever they were telling me over the phone.
He's not moving at all. Listen to me. Lay him flat on his back. He's cold. He's ice cold.
I tell her, I'm like, put Elijah on the ground while I'm on the phone with the operators, and I'm trying to do CPR and doing compressions and all of that. But it was evident that he was gone at that point, but I just had to keep trying.
It wasn't long, and the fire department, they're just right over here. They came, their people came, and then pretty soon you had, DHS people and the sheriff's department people, and they put us all outside, and they taped off the property with that yellow tape, and we sat out in the driveway, and we had to write statements. So we wrote the statements, and then we interviewed one by one with DHS. Then I called Bill, and he came running home from work, and his supervisor and his coworkers could tell something terrible had happened when they saw his face. So they told him, just go. Don't worry about anything. We'll take care of it. He doesn't run because he has bad knees, but I saw him run that day. He ran to the house. He wanted to pray for Elijah. And they wouldn't let him in. They kept fighting with him, and he kept fighting and saying, I want to see my grandson.
My mom called me, and she just had said that Elijah's dead. I just hung up and said I was gonna head there, and I just told my boss, and then I ran out of the building and drove to Broken Arrow to my parents' house, and then I called my aunt and uncle who I was living with when I was in college, and I said I'm on my way to Broken Arrow to see my family because they said something happened to Elijah.
And then they put him out for I don't know how many hours, and then finally they let us go in and see him as they were putting him in the body bag. So then, his mother, Desiree, was on staff at Teen Challenge. She didn't know anything had happened yet. So we decided as a family, because Gabriel rushed home from his place he was in, Edmond had a teaching job there. So he rushed home, and then when they were all done with the stuff they were doing, we all went as a family and asked the neighbors to watch for Clayton at the bus stop and let him stay with them until we got back. And we went to Teen Challenge together as a family, and we told Desiree what happened.
If I had to be honest, I feel like if I had to go back to that day when everything happened, when Clayton was taken the day after Elijah had passed, I feel like my life just stopped there as far as grieving and as far as like dealing with everything that happened. So it was just, it's been compacted and compiled, like just keeps adding up. Going through all of this and then having to try to process the fact that I've lost a son to him passing away and then losing another son to DHS taking him away. And not just losing my children, I also lost my parents. I just don't feel like we can grieve or even start that process, honestly, at least for me, because I don't feel like anything's been resolved. Everything that I know that my son's going through currently and that my family's had to continue to go through, I don't think any of us will really understand the severity or I guess the wholeness of everything that's happened to us until after Clayton's home.
When this whole ordeal began back in 2018, we really had the mindset of just trust the professionals and that the law would sort of work itself out in the way that it's supposed to.
We had this mindset of this is a huge misunderstanding. We were raised to trust in the law and to trust in law enforcement and the way that the judicial system runs. And so from the beginning, we were like, okay, this will all go away quickly.
We really thought this would naturally blow over and the truth would reveal itself very quickly, and that turned out to not be the case.
I met the Woolleys in an odd way, actually. I was aware of the case because it was getting a lot of publicity, and rightfully so. And I think one day they just kind of came walking in. I think one of the deputy sheriffs recommended me, and so they came in and we had a conversation. And this was actually maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and it was early on when the criminal case was going. Knowing who they probably were going to use as a lawyer, I recommended that they stay with him, so I didn't get involved in the criminal case. So I really just watched it from the sidelines for a couple of years.
First thing I noticed was all the sheriff's vehicles there and the fire trucks with, the paramedics were there. And the house was roped off as a crime scene, and they wouldn't let me in the house. They put us all in the driveway. We all were sitting in there, and then they interviewed each of us. We had to fill out a report of our own account of what took place.
There was a sense about the detective that was unsettling. He seemed angry or something, like maybe he had a chip on his shoulder, but I just picked that kind of stuff up. But anyway, we just totally cooperated because we didn't know of any reason not to, and we didn't know better. We were later to find out that the supervisor of the detective, the lead detective, had talked on the phone to the lead detective before the lead detective got to the house. And the lead detective said to his supervisor that he was coming to a murder scene because there's no such thing as SIDS. That kind of explained a little bit why I was picking up that attitude that I felt like there was a chip on his shoulder or something. But we didn't know where it came from, and our pastors came immediately. Other people picked that up in him too, and we didn't know how to explain it at the time.
Well, I found it very hard to believe that the lead investigator, Danny Elliott, before he even got there, he had made the comment that he was on his way to a murder scene. And I do criminal law, and I'm like, wait a minute, shouldn't you show up and do an investigation before you make that determination? And I guess that wasn't necessary with him. So that was just one of the first most shocking things. That's what started it off, and then just after that, it's just one thing after another.
We found out later that the DHS supervisor who was conducting the interviews, he didn't think there was anything inappropriate that happened. He just felt like it was an unexplainable death. But then he said also that, but they're not going to be the sheriff's office and the detective. I don't think that they're going to let it go. I think they're going to pursue it, press it.
So say like the first realization of, oh, they think this is a murder was in the first initial interview with Detective Elliott and his other detective.
What do you think happened to Elijah? What's being said?
The paramedic said SIDS, which I don't know exactly what that is. It just seems like an answer for we don't know.
Well, the paramedic can't make a diagnosis.
Right, that's all we've heard. No one has ever updated us.
And in my specific interview, they never outright accused my parents. I got that after from my parents.
Well, there's a couple of things, and unfortunately, as cops, we don't always agree with paramedics. There's no such thing as SID.
And I remember that in my interview, at some point about halfway through, it was like the tone changed. They started asking me questions like, well, did you ever see anything that you felt like was odd? And I was like, well, yes, the severity of the constipation. The detective was like, no, not that. And I said, okay, well, yeah, sometimes he struggled with allergies a lot, and he had congestion a lot. No, not that. Once they kept dismissing everything I was saying, I couldn't understand why. I thought this is information they're going to want to know. And after a while, I figured out they're looking for something. They're looking for something evil here.
They asked me all these questions in the interview leading up to it that I guess they were dancing around it, but it didn't connect for me because I wasn't thinking like that. And then they just kind of came out and said, well, he was murdered.
I went to Elijah's autopsy this morning.
Okay.
And there's some very serious things during the autopsy that the pathologist found that indicates that there was some foul play involved, that Elijah was actually killed.
Oh my God.
And I distinctly remember clear as day, the very first thought that popped in my head was, how did somebody break in and kill him? And I distinctly remember a video playing in my head of your typical ski mask burglar coming through the window. That's literally what I pictured in my head. The second that they said that was the first thought that went through my head. And I started going through all this, how would somebody break in? Okay, we locked all the doors. How did they break a window? I didn't see a broken window. Just going through that whole track. And then I remember saying it out loud.
How?
No, I'm not going to get into too much of that information.
I was raised to trust police and trust authority. And so he said they were murdered. I was like, okay, he's murdered. They were like, it was someone in the house. And I was like, what? Well, it's just us in the house. So that doesn't make any sense. No. It's someone in the house. And he kept leading me there. And I was like, well, no, I don't think you're understanding me. It was just us in the house. So that doesn't make sense. And the more that I wasn't tracking with what he wanted me to track with, he seemed to get more frustrated.
I need to know if there was anybody else in that house that night.
No one at all. It was just my parents and me and Clayton.
And Clayton's actually been put into protective custody at this point.
The most animosity was definitely in the second interview. He was very aggressive with his frustration that I wouldn't just do what he wanted me to do, if that makes sense. And this was after we knew all the accusations. They were asking me these questions, and I was like, yeah, I have no problem answering these questions. I would just like to be Mirandized because I assume you did it last time. I assume if anything I say can be used in court, then just for my safety and yours. And they just kept refusing to do that. I've been advised by lawyers to do that, and so I'm going to do that. And I was like, can anything I say be used against me or my parents in court? And he said no.
Whatever I say can still be held in court, right?
No.
And I was like, that's a lie. So I'm going to ask again. And I was like, can anything I say be used against me or my parents in court? And he said, well, it depends on what you say.
But I'm asking, can what I say in here, is this being held against me in court? Or against anyone in my family in court?
It just depends on what you tell me.
So, yes. Okay.
I was more than happy to answer any questions that they had, as I did the first time, as I did every time after that. But they got really upset at that and were like, fine, if you don't want to talk, whatever, and stormed out. And then, just were visibly very upset at that.
On the very day that Elijah passed away, Clayton had already gone to school. DHS goes to school to talk to Clayton. Clayton doesn't know that his brother has passed away. So this is a kid with no agenda, no coaching, nothing. He's just getting called in and being asked questions.
They had all kinds of questions, and one of the things that he kept saying is, that everybody in my home is safe. Nobody gets hurt in my house. Are there more smiley faces or sad faces in your house? There's more smiley faces. I always felt safe, He was very direct. And then this interview was hidden from us. We didn't even discover it for over a year. We could have stopped everything in the very beginning.
There is nothing, I mean nothing, negative in that DHS report about the Woolleys, about his grandparents. Quite the opposite. Well, that report seems to have disappeared. And during all the criminal hearings and all the things that had gone on over those years, nobody seemed to be able to find that report. I don't know why, but that seems to be the story.
They put him through about 8 different interviews altogether. All of the interviews, by the way, exonerated us, except for the one unrecorded one that had no witnesses in the room, done by the same nurse, that had all these wild allegations and was said in a way that our grandson couldn't have even spoken because he has a speech impediment.
Which was outside her scope
Which is outside
expertise.
her scope. Yes, exactly. We found actually about 25 discrepancies, things that couldn't have happened, that were in that one-page handwritten report that she wrote from memory a few hours after our interview. And there was another interview, a second one, that was hidden from the defense for over a year. And in that one, the interviewer asked him, "Didn't you just tell the nurse, the same nurse a few days ago, about what happened to your brother's butt and his privates?"
Yeah, but I want to visit the nurse now.
You want to visit the nurse now? Okay, how come?
Because her questions take a short time.
Because her questions take a short time. Okay.
And our grandson looked at her and, according to the transcript, and said no, indicating that he never even had such a conversation with her.
How about, did you talk to her about Papa?
No, I don't remember it.
You don't remember it? Okay.
So we strongly believe that she was influenced by the detective. She was kind of new at it, and I realized that it doesn't take much sometimes. You can just say something like, "You might be this child's only hope," and they can feel the need to make something happen or embellish.
Well, they had to, because they had no evidence. And since they had no evidence, they had to force evidence. And so I believe the detective had only he used the coroner that was at the scene and basically convinced her what happened. Then that was in turn turned over to the medical examiner's office. And that's the only report besides the handwritten SANE report that they had as evidence. They used those. And which is bizarre to me, is the first time we were charged and arrested was for an incident that our grandson said that my privates touched him one time in the shower. And he had wet his bed. We were trying to get him ready for bed.
School.
Lisa brought him in, because I was showering to get ready for work, to rinse him off in the shower. So I rinsed him off and handed him back in a matter of a minute. She dried him off and dressed him.
What was he doing with his hands when he was touching your privates? With his hands?
Giving me a bath.
Just giving you a bath. Okay.
From an evidence standpoint, the freshest evidence we have on Clayton was the very day all this tragedy happened. And again, a kid with no agenda is telling the truth. Even in the rules of evidence, there's a phrase that if it's an excited utterance, that's an exception to the hearsay rule. That's not that was an excited utterance, but it has all the qualifications of a true story. He's just speaking the truth. There's nothing negative there. But then later on, as the case progresses, you have sane nurses coming in. Oh, he blamed his grandfather for all this stuff, and they put words in Clayton's mouth, but they never put up the first most accurate, most reliable report, and that was the day of the passing.
They found nothing in the house. It was completely clean.
And they left a lot of evidence behind, exculpatory evidence behind, as far as the bedding and other things. In fact, when they came back, they left about 2 weeks, about 70 diapers.
The lead investigator, he didn't take the diapers. The only diaper that went to the medical examiner was the one that Elijah was wearing when he passed away. So I don't know how you leave the mattress pad. I don't know how you leave the diapers. I don't know how you make representations to the medical examiner that apparently aren't true. And then you call that a valid investigation.
When I wouldn't say argue, but I would share my perspective and my point of view of what I grew up with and stuff. They, of course, tried showing me, or telling me, I was never actually shown anything. They told me they had all this evidence.
And while we're investigating what appears to be what it is, this 5-year-old child, Papa put his privates in Elijah's butt.
Mm-hmm.
When Elijah cries, Papa yells at him and spanks him and hurts him.
Okay.
I'm sorry, why is that funny?
Because it's just so absurd. In my mind, it's absurd.
It may be absurd, and I agree with you. In this situation, maybe it's absurd, but
that's what he's...
Why,
now, I don't know
let me ask
how
you
he
this.
said
Why would
this.
Clayton say something like that?
I don't know. If I could see the interview, that would be amazing. Because I would like to know what everybody said to him during the interview.
There was no, at one time, did they ever look for the truth. They were there to just try to prove their theory, and everything that went against that, they didn't use.
Babies don't just die. You always hear people talk about, well, there's SIDS. Okay, well, SIDS doesn't actually exist.
But I think the killer to me is just this. At one of the hearings, again before my time, but at one of the hearings, the lead investigator was asked, are you aware of sudden infant death syndrome? Almost an exact quote. He says, his testimony is, I'm aware that it's a fictitious diagnosis. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? So ironically enough, the Oklahoma Department of Human Services, since 2016, every year does a Sudden Infant Death Awareness Day. But the lead investigator says it's a, quote, fictitious diagnosis, which was based on him going to some class down in Atlanta. So I said, okay, so you got a first aid merit badge. That's great. But yeah, the real doctors, no.
The whole attitude with the detective was that I was the devil incarnate and the evilest person in the world.
There's a lot of things about the body. You remember when I asked you guys when I first showed up, is anybody left-handed?
Mm-hmm.
I asked that question for a specific reason.
Mm-hmm.
Are you left-handed?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. With the evidence that's there, it indicates a left-handed person.
They were not just asking what took place, they were telling me what I did.
I have physical evidence that shows that this baby died a violent death. This baby was trying to scream, and somebody shut that baby up by shoving its head down into either a mattress, a pillow, the floor, something. And that's what they did to while this child was being sodomized.
And they said, you raped and murdered that baby, and we're going to make sure you go to prison for life. And that's their whole attitude. There's two detectives.
In fact, the DA that we have right now actually prefers circumstantial cases over actual evidence, because circumstantial evidence points one direction, as opposed to, let's say somebody saw you, an eyewitness. Okay, you know how bad eyewitnesses can be, if you watch any of those shows.
When I, got this terrible news and then found out that they were arrested. I assumed it was something really bad at their house, that they would have had big evidence against them in order to put them in prison and charge them and take away Clayton and not give him back. You know, it didn't make sense to me, but I assumed they had something.
When the charges first came, it was a big parade for the sheriff and the DA's office, and all the newscasts were going on about the grandparents with murdering this child, and the sheriff going on TV holding a press conference. So they announced it as loudly and as expansively as possible.
We begin tonight with a disturbing story from Wagner County. This couple is behind bars tonight, accused of sexually abusing a 5-year-old, also under investigation in the death of a 1-year-old this evening.
My focus right now as a county sheriff is to get to the bottom of this case and find out why a 14-month-old baby just mysteriously dies, and there's no reason why that baby should have died.
When a child dies, it's a big investigation. How big could this investigation be if they didn't talk to any of the people that cared for the child? I feel like they should have talked to me.
When we got out of jail the first time, we weren't charged with any other charges yet. The sheriff goes on in his full uniform and goes on TV on all the networks, and he goes, they are obviously a tight-knit family, but children just don't die, and somebody in that home murdered or killed that baby.
And we have new developments tonight for a Broken Arrow couple charged with child sexual abuse.
Right now, deputies are also looking into whether the couple could be involved in another child death.
Sheriff Chris Elliott says by all accounts, the Woolleys are a very tight-knit family.
We've talked to all their neighbors. Their neighbors are all very shocked.
A judge has decided Bill Woolley and his wife Lisa will stand trial.
We're able to stop this before it happened because we didn't know about it.
Those counts involve the 5-year-old relative. Deputies are also investigating the death of that child's younger sibling, who was found dead inside the home back in March.
14-month-old babies just don't die. There's a reason why they die. We're operating under the pretenses right now that somebody inside that home murdered that child.
So deputies contacted DHS, who then took the 5-year-old and a 17-year-old away from the couple.
I have video on my phone of him not feeling good. I have pictures of him, and he would smile and laugh if you would tickle him. And again, I've got video of this, but I'm just irritated that they did not ask me. And if I would have known, I hope I would have been knocking down some doors. I would have told them that I did not see red flags with these children from the get-go, and that I had training because I'd worked at the YMCA and I'd worked in childcare. All my training was up to date for child abuse prevention, sexual abuse prevention, and so I knew some of the red flags to look for.
Being summoned for the grand jury part, that kind of happened at my college in Stillwater. So I went to Oklahoma State University. I got a call one day. I was on campus, and it was from campus police. So I answered the phone, and they're like, "This is campus police. Where are you?" I just told them I was like, "I'm going to the library." And they were like, "Okay, go to the library. Stay there. Don't move." And so I did what they told me to do in library and didn't move. And after a minute, in walks Detective Elliott, one of the officers, and then also, I can't remember his name, but the other gentleman who was in the interviews with Elliott at all times. And they all walked in together. Very smug looks on their face, and they had these papers for me. And they walked up to me in the busiest, most crowded place on campus in front of all of these people, which was, very embarrassing and very everyone's looking around like, "Oh, what did she do? Why are they here?" kind of thing. And they served me these papers, and I asked them why they were doing this. And Detective Elliott said, "Well, since you wouldn't answer our questions last time, we had to do it the hard way." I show up at the courthouse. I'm just in this big room alone with this big case file marked William H. Woolley, my dad's name, right on it. The DA, Jack Thorpe, he comes in and he sits down and he pulls the case file away from me and he puts it right in front of him. He's like, "Hey, I want you to know that I don't think you would do such a thing. Like, I would never think that some 17-year-old sweet kid would be involved with this. But Detective Elliott, you know, I'm holding him back on a leash because he just wants to put you in cuffs right now. I had said, I don't want to see pictures. And I said, just let me know so I can turn around so you can show, if you want to show my lawyer, go for it. I don't care. I just don't want to see it because I don't know anyone who would want to see that. And it was crazy because in that time he had those pictures he was rifling through. And after I said that, he went like this and he said, oops, and he dropped them in front of me. Basically, it gets to the point where he's like, if you testify for us in this grand jury proceeding, then we will give you immunity so you can never be like charged with this. It's the truth. Like, I want to tell it. So like, you don't have to convince me to. I don't know if the point of all of it was to like shake me up and they thought they could, you know, break me because I was the youngest. So the second time that I came, I had to get documents from Jack Thorpe to be excused from my finals so I could reschedule my finals since I was missing them. And so he knew what classes I was taking. And he knew I was taking a class called entomology, which is the study of bugs and how they affect our world and whatnot. And he knew I was taking that class. And so when he came in, I had asked him politely, I was like, hey, just a heads up, like, I don't really like looking at pictures of my nephews, like, you know, at the crime scene and things like that. So I was like, if you could please not show me any when I'm in there testifying, like, don't put it on the big screen when I'm testifying because I will be kind of a mess and not able to testify very well. And his response was, why would you care? It's not any worse than what you look at in entomology class. That's him comparing my dead nephew, a baby, to bugs, which is disgusting that someone would ever say that, in my opinion. And I was pretty appalled and offended by that because he's talking about someone who's very near and dear to my heart and comparing them to a cockroach. I was like, that's horrible. And even ADA Michelle Keeley like kind of scoffed. Like, it was very evident she was in shock that he would say that. My lawyer was in shock that he would ever say that. And I think he could tell that everyone was like very offended by that. And he said, geez, sorry, just trying to break the ice. I get called in. He takes me into the actual interview. Walk into this just big room. And there's a bunch of tables lined up on either side. And then there's an aisle with a podium in the back. Podium has Michelle Keeley on it because she is going to be asking questions. I'm all the way at the front of the aisle, sitting in a chair next to my lawyer. There's like 2 jurors at each table, and they're all just kind of all the way back. And Jack Thorpe and ADA Bennett are sitting in the back table, so none of the jurors can see them. One of the grand jurors asked me, they were like, well, why would you not go in and check on the boys? And I thought that was just such a crazy question because I was like, you know, why would you? I remember asking the jurors, like, do you have kids? Like, yeah. I'm like, okay. When your kids are asleep and you're up and if you don't hear anything, what is your first thought? And they're like, they're asleep. And I'm like, so why would I think any differently? Like, if you put your kids to bed and you hear nothing, the assumption is that they're peacefully sleeping, right? Nobody is like, oh, they're dead. Like, that's just not a thing you think. I did listen. I intentionally put my ear to the door multiple times that night to listen, to make sure they weren't fussing, to make sure they were okay, just like I did every night. And if I were to go in there when they're peacefully sleeping, I'm going to wake them up. The last thing you want to do with babies and kids is wake them up. Another juror asked me, they were like, hey, well, how do you explain this then? Because this is crazy, you know? As far as explaining his death goes, I'm not a doctor. I can't tell you that. But what I can tell you is the paramedics, when they got there, the first thing that they told me they thought it was SIDS. So I'm going to go with that. I was like, aside from that, he had acute pneumonia in his right lung, which, again, pneumonia is a very common cause of death in infants. So that right there is something that should be discussed and you probably weren't told. And so we're like, you add acute pneumonia and you add him not feeling well and all that together. And also he was a premature baby who was malnourished, completely undersized, and born to a drug addicted mom. The weakness that body is going to have in comparison to a normal, healthy baby. His growth was stunted. There's so much going into that. So you take all of those at-risk factors and you put them together. It's more shocking like that you're accusing something and not thinking that's the cause of death. I mean, even in the most minor things in life, if you're accused of something, you know, you just want the truth to be said. They probably didn't know, but the medical examiner's office, who you're speaking so highly of, they lost their accreditation 13 years ago, never got it back, and have an F rating. And the jurors were like, what? I was like, yeah, so take everything they say with a grain of salt, because I don't know who trusts a doctor who's not accredited and also has an F rating, but I sure would never go to that doctor. I don't know if they told you, but like, I was like, I don't like to be graphic or, gross, but I'm gonna tell you the facts. And I was like, he suffered from really severe constipation. He's been to the doctor for it. And we have the diapers still in the trash that the detective left and didn't want to take. They were shocked by that. They were like, oh my God, like, we'd never heard of this. And Michelle Keeley interrupted me and was like, oh, where are these diapers you're talking about? We've never heard of them. We were like, you know where they're at. You didn't want to take them because you didn't want to know any other evidence. You just want to know what fit your narrative. And she was like, well, I'm going to need to talk to you after about that. And she never came and talked to me after about that. And I remember Jack Thorpe, the ADA, in the back. When I said that, his face was so red. He was so angry. He stood up and like slammed his hands on the table. Like he wanted to interrupt me, but he couldn't. And that obviously ruffled some feathers there. But, the truth is truth. And they asked me to tell the truth. So I did. And then I also went in and was like, the best way that I can tell people what kind of household I was raised in, and i.e. what the boys were raised in, was when my sister was pregnant with him, and I was told, the day I was told that she was pregnant, I was so excited. And I remember I was like, Mom, take me to the store. Take me to the store. Takes me to the store. I get this notebook, stencils, markers, all this stuff. I come home and I was like, I'm going to write to this baby every day. From the moment she found out that she was pregnant to him being born, I wrote, without missing a day, a page every single day in that book. And I still have it. And my plan was to give it to him when he was old enough to understand what it meant, to show him how much love his household had for him. And every single page in there, in my 11-year-old and 12-year-old handwriting, says, Grandma, we're so excited for you, and I'm so excited for you, and I love you, and we love you. That book, as silly and goofy as it is, came from the overfill of my parents' love for me. Because they gave me so much love that I couldn't contain it all. And so when another vessel was brought into the household, that was my way of taking the overfill from my parents and giving it to him. And you've got these parents who gave you everything and quite literally are some of the best parents that God could have ever given me. And they gave you your whole life. And, in elementary school, they're like, who's your heroes? I'm like, my dad, my mom. Like, and then have those same heroes be, like, told that they are these horrible human beings is like insane. Yeah, it seemed to be okay because I didn't get the indictment. And, 99% of cases get the indictment. So that had to mean something to them.
They arrested us a second time for my charges were first-degree murder and sexually assault of a minor under 12. And Lisa's was first-degree murder and enabling sexual assault of a minor under 12. She had a $500,000 bond, and they refused to give me a bond.
A Wagner County couple already facing charges of child sex abuse were today charged with murder.
A district attorney says William and Lisa Woolley are responsible for the death of their 14-month-old grandson earlier this year. News on 6's Amy Kaufman is live in Wagner County on our top story tonight.
Well, Terry and Brian, the Woolleys were here at the Wagner County Courthouse this afternoon for a hearing related to those child sex abuse charges that were filed back in April. But today they found out they would also be charged with first-degree murder for the death of their grandson.
Elijah did not deserve to die like that. And so our job as law enforcement, as prosecutors, is to make sure somebody is held very accountable for that.
We went 4 months before our preliminary again. And at that preliminary, we brought in an expert witness, the chief medical examiner from Wayne County in Michigan. He's done more infant autopsies in 1 year than the entire Oklahoma medical examiner's office has done in their entire existence.
He's a well-known guy, especially in child sex crimes. I mean, he's like the guy in Oklahoma. And in fact, made a comment to the effect that the medical examiner's findings were just wrong. Doesn't even know how she got there. In Tulsa County, the medical examiner's office isn't certified or whatever it's supposed to be, accredited. So the most qualified, respected guy disagreed with everything that the medical examiner said.
He took every single thing and just told how it's impossible from the findings of the medical examiner. They They didn't follow protocol. He said had they been accredited, they had to have followed all the guidelines and how to do an autopsy. And they're not experienced in infants. And he says there's a major difference between doing an autopsy on an infant and an adult.
Every allegation in the Tulsa ME report, when it was looked at by the experts, there was not one laceration at all. Even an expert that came along later, the world recognized Dr. Block, death expert, said this didn't happen.
Somewhere along the line in the preliminary hearing, they had talked to our attorneys and agreed they would reduce our bond to $25,000 each. The judge agreed to do it for $25,000 for both of us, $12,500 each. And the interesting thing is they botched the paperwork. So this is a late Friday. So we had to wait till Saturday. The judge couldn't come back to fix the paperwork. They said we wouldn't get out till Monday. They called the district judge. He came down on a Saturday, an hour drive to fix the paperwork and an hour back. Why would he do that to get us out of jail if he didn't think we were innocent?
What the investigators present is only a portion of the evidence. And so often in the media, it's presented as the only evidence. And those who are accused don't have a voice. And so I approach it as a journalist who wants to hear both sides. I also approach it as a human being that if I were accused, I would want to have a voice. Honestly, it made me not want to live in that county because it told me anybody can be accused and you can be totally innocent and you don't have a voice at all. And guess what? You can have a child taken away from you. That poor child at the age of 5 who was yanked out of that house without any explanation and his family just disappeared. What would that do to you as a child who's 5? Where is everybody I love? Where'd they go? And for those the family that poured their hearts clearly and time into these children, they were ripped away. If that happened to my child, and I'm a law-abiding citizen, that's one thing that would turn me into a criminal. I'd do anything to get my child back. This is a clear case of guilty until proven innocent. It's wrong. It's an abuse of the system.
I got a phone call from a pastor friend of mine in Conroe, Texas, and he asked me if I knew the Woolleys, and I said no, and he told me about them. And he said, John, they're a real godly family, and I want you to look into it. And then he had another minister that had been their pastor about 20 years ago. He called me. I didn't believe it at first. I said it was so egregious and so unreasonable that something like that could happen in America to godly people that I was skeptical.
They finally decided to let go of the murder charges and the molestation charges. But they didn't quite want to let go of it. Apparently, the ADA said that the detective wasn't willing to just let it go.
Not only did they charge us, they charged our daughter also. They brought her in on it.
So he drew up a 29-point affidavit, which he took into the judge and had the judge sign without any evidence and without checking jurisdiction or anything like that. Pushed that through and changed the charges from that to neglect.
And it was just really, literally, it just looked like they were making it up as they went. I think the way that they amended the charges, or why they amended the charges, is because the murder case is gone, but they still have Clayton, and they can't justify that anymore. And so what do? You filed more charges, and then you use those bogus charges to justify keeping Clayton away from the family, long after the professional evidence had shown that these children were not at all in danger with their grandparents.
What I've heard again and again is that they trust their investigative process and they trust the medical examiner. Cheryl Niblo has never recanted and said, hey, I might have been wrong. The DA says, the sheriff's office says, the sheriff himself says, we stand by what the ME has concluded. And they're overlooking expertise that goes beyond Cheryl Niblo. I mean, you have the ME in Detroit who is a known expert around the country, not just in what he does in terms of who done it when there's a death, but child deaths. This guy's an expert in that. He said the ME's investigation was desperately flawed.
And the whole thing, which is bizarre, was they never checked to see where we lived at that time. We didn't even live in Wagner County. We were in Tulsa County. So their charge was totally, even the judge signed off on it, without any jurisdiction or venue, is what they call it. And then they changed the dates so they can include where we live now in Wagner County. And they didn't even look at the statute of limitations. It had ran out 7 months already. And the judge signed off on that too, without checking anything. And then to get around all this stuff, the judge allowed them to make their own law up and charge us with that, because it said abuse, but the contents were charges for neglect in the law. There's two separate laws. Right. And they used abuse because it carries a 45-year statute of limitations. Right. That was their workaround, but they made their own law up, and that was what was illegal about it.
The reason that they even let go of the murder and molestation charges was because Dr. Block had come into the situation.
Well, Dr. Block also had wrote a rebuttal against the abuse charges, saying that didn't exist. There was no neglect, there was no abuse.
But I always say Ms. Money raised an ugly child, not a stupid child. And I've been around the block a couple of times, so that really is the question. Why would they do this? What's the plus in it? Are you embarrassed because the evidence didn't back you up? Well, why is that embarrassing? That's why they call it evidence. Whatever the evidence is, that's whatever the evidence is. Just you follow the evidence, as they say. Well, you're having to dismiss the murder case because there wasn't any evidence of that. So you're going to use that same non-evidence to file a child neglect charge? Well, the answer is yes. That's what he did.
But when Dr. Block, somebody that the prosecution, the state has used time and again to support their cases, when he comes forward and says, hey, this couple did nothing wrong, why don't they believe their own expert?
When these investigations start out, you obviously don't know then what you know now. So assuming that people are acting in good faith, but when you see the state, when you see the prosecutors filing charges, amending charges, dismissing charges to replace them with new charges, it's like they were making it up as they went, because they weren't charged with murder at first. Well, finally they were charged with murder. But within a year or so, they had letters from the most highly qualified physician in Oklahoma, probably, who frequently testifies for the state, for the prosecutors. He had said Elijah wasn't murdered, wasn't killed, wasn't neglected. He died from an identifiable medical reason, and that got ignored.
While so many in law enforcement do a wonderful job, and I've always supported what they do, and what a difficult position they have, there are some who refuse to admit when they're wrong. In this case, they have refused over and over to admit that they're wrong, they know better, and they have such huge prides that they cannot consider anything else beyond what they see and feel.
The thing that I really took issue with was around that same time, the DA's office presented an offer to us that if we would surrender pursuing custody of Clayton, that they would drop all the felony charges, which they just about were ready to be dropped anyway, all the felony charges which they had changed recently to neglect. So when we heard that, we had so many mixed emotions. It was like, oh my gosh, I was thinking, oh my God, he could be in my arms tonight. I could see him, I could touch him. But then the other voice was like, wait a minute, I thought they thought you were, dangerous people. How could they offer you visitation, So it didn't make any sense. We met together as we agreed on a Monday at Bill's attorney's office to discuss it with the DA's office. But At that point, they had changed their mind apparently because a new news piece came out that Fox News put out, and they were mad about it. And so the ADA said, deal's off the table.
For the first time, I met Jack Thorpe, who's the district attorney. At first, I was succumbed to his charm. I said, Mr. Thorpe, I said, it's my belief that a person is innocent until proven guilty. And he said, I believe that also. And he makes a statement to me, and he says there's a difference between a person being innocent and not having enough evidence to find them guilty. And I said, you filed these charges against the Woolleys that have been proven to be wrong, and the courts had to drop it. And he made a point of telling me I made the decision to drop those charges. But what he neglected to tell me, he immediately filed some additional charges that had no merit, and he finally had to drop those charges because this couple is innocent. And I asked Jack Thorpe the other day, why don't you just drop the charges? Because he said, well, we're looking at new things. And I said, well, what's the statute of limitations? And he says, there is no statute of limitations on murder. And so for Jack to look me in the eye and said there's no statute of limitations for murder, I think there's a bias in his county, beginning with his office, and I don't understand why a person that's elected to a public office like that would have a bias against an innocent citizen.
It's wrong. It's an abuse of the system. I wouldn't live in Wagner County because I don't trust the Wagner County Sheriff's Office anymore, and the checks and balances in Wagner County from top to bottom, from the commission to the Sheriff's Office to the DA to the judges, is flawed.
I can understand somebody being accused of child abuse and everybody rushes in because we don't want that to be true. But when you find there's no evidence, there ought to be just as much of an effort to free that couple and erase that suspicion, but that's not been the case. It seems like that Wagner County has doubled down and are trying their best to fit a peg in a round hole.
The state's motion, which is in writing, which is a public record, anybody can look it up. What they put down there was dismissing the case pending the filing of new charges. Well, see, that's interesting because they were dismissing the case because of Dr. Block's letters. One was in May of 20 and one was about May of 21.
It's a bittersweet because yes, they did drop the charges, but no, they don't ever go away. The thing that still hangs me up is the charge, even though it's invalid, a murder, has no statute of limitations. They could come back anytime in our lifetime and charge us or even our grandson, who was present at the time, with murder, and you have to fight it all over again.
At that point, they'd kept Clayton away for so long and they couldn't justify it. And I think the real conundrum was, once you dismiss the charges based on what the physician says, what their professional witness physician said, that Elijah wasn't killed, wasn't abused, laid out the history of medical care that these children actually got, once you know that, and you dismiss the murder case, how do you keep Clayton away from the Woolleys?
In fact, one of the judges said to my daughter, if you don't believe that your parents are guilty, you'll never see your son again.
Like other people, I have heard, I won't say grapevine type stuff, but people that seem to be in a position to know that after the murder case was dismissed, that people in the district attorney's office were showing just random people, legislators, other lawyers, whoever, autopsy photographs of Elijah. I mean, how disgusting is that? The child wasn't killed, wasn't even neglected, wasn't abused, but somebody thinks it's okay to show pictures like that? That's disgusting. And when the first responders in Kobe Bryant's case did it, they got hit with a $30 million judgment and they deserved it.
We've come through all of this to find out now we have a new opponent, DHS.
So it was very frustrating to find out that even though, our parents have been exonerated and the charges are dropped, that doesn't necessarily mean that Clayton gets to come home.
From the criminal charges, those have all been dropped. But the Department of Human Services, they won't accept that kind of evidence. They are holding the Woolley family hostage.
Father of Governor Kevin Stitt joined others today calling out the Wagner County Sheriff's Office and Oklahoma DHS over their treatment of a Broken Arrow family.
The governor's dad, John Stitt, said in all his years he has never seen a more appalling case of injustice against a family and against an innocent child.
So they're saying that we're innocent, but that we're not dangerous, and yet they still won't let us have our child back. And those two things just don't make sense. If we're innocent, then we should have Clayton back in our lives. And that's just not how it works.
There are two roads, and one's the courthouse road, and one is the Oklahoma Department of Human Services road. And they talk to each other, and they're connected to each other, but for the criminal things, all that's in the courthouse. Now, some of the same evidence that gets used in the courthouse gets used for DHS to remove children from unsafe environments. And that's a noble job. That's what they ought to do. No issues with that. The challenge becomes when you're using the same evidence and the evidence that you're using in the courthouse is now non-existent. I won't even say it's insufficient. It's non-existent. That child was not murdered, wasn't killed, wasn't molested, wasn't anything but dying in its sleep, unfortunately. When all that evidence that the prosecutors wanted so hard so they could get their conviction, when that went away, it should have gone away over at the DHS house also, because it's the exact same evidence. They didn't do it. They can't bring themselves to do it.
As the years passed, we learned that that's not how it works, that they get to change the rules once you're in the game, and that they don't have to make it right. Once they falsely press charges and falsely kidnap your child, they don't have to make it right. And so they dropped the charges, but they didn't give back Clayton.
I initially had sent a letter to the judge and the DHS up the chain and trauma counselor and said, okay, this is what's happened in our case. We've been clear to this. Here's the experts' reports. Here's all the evidence. We just want to know, how do we begin the process of having our grandson in our life again? What steps do we need to take? Do we need to get a trauma counselor to help us make the transition? What do we need to do? Of course, we got nothing back but crickets.
We eventually realized that though all within the legal system, DHS and criminal investigations operate as two different entities. Though they sort of intertwine or cross paths at times, they operate independent of each other. So even though the criminal charges are dropped because there was no evidence of any crime, DHS, who took Clayton away from us because of the criminal charges, is not obligated to give it back, because now DHS and criminal charges are being treated as two separate matters, even though originally they were cause and effect.
I called one of the district supervisors, and she didn't call me back, but she did have one of her underlings call me, and she just railed on about how we had done these things, and she kept going, and so finally I said, wait. I said, I'm not clear. You guys, in hanging on to the initial allegations, which have been debunked, that none of that matters. I said, do you take any of that into consideration? She said, it's substantiated and that's all. And I said, yes, but so you're saying nothing after that ever matters? And she just went completely silent.
There is this sense of relief, but there isn't this full sense of rejoicing because we still don't have Clayton back. Our family really isn't restored. So it's like, how can we celebrate?
When a case is commenced, both state law and DHS regulations that say that the state prefers kinship placement, that should be the goal, is to keep children with family. So in the Woolley's case, you have their son, you have a daughter, you have other maternal family members, all of whom would love to have Clayton, but for some reason, the district attorney in DHS, the lawyer for the state of Oklahoma and the lawyer for DHS just apparently doesn't care about the preference for kinship placement.
I had decided to write a letter to petition for custody of my nephew Clayton to DHS, to Jennifer Rollman specifically, his case manager.
So as the criminal stuff happens and as the process goes forward, there came a time when somebody finds this lady and who has never met Clayton before. My information is that she's never met him, never even saw a picture of him before. So they scrape her up out of someplace and they make her the guardian of Clayton.
In the letter to DHS, I had mentioned that I was very willing to relocate back to Oklahoma or anywhere they needed me to be able to have custody. Even if it meant Clayton and I lived together, needed to move somewhere else away from the family. I expressed in the letter that I was willing to do whatever it took.
There's different kinds of guardianships, and in Oklahoma, this is called a 10A guardianship, was kind of a permanent guardianship. Somebody's got to go vacate that 10A guardianship. Well, who's got standing to do that? Well, first of all, you shouldn't even have to do it because that never should have happened. But it did. So who's keeping it where it is right now? The district attorney. Why? Because the district attorney represents DHS. Who is DHS as a lawyer, if you will? It's the district attorney.
We are now in a legal battle to try to be able to see him because they have not allowed not only us, but the judge wrote that nobody in our family could see him.
At this point, I had already worked in education for 4 years, so I didn't necessarily, I guess I was hoping to appeal to their logic. Because in the letter, I laid out all my qualifications, all my experience, and it came to nothing. They just responded with, "Thank you for your letter. DHS will follow the Oklahoma state laws accordingly."
People who are unrelated, out of state, couldn't even see him, who are part of his life. Not one person in our church could see him. Not one friend could see him. They totally kidnapped him out of our family, out of his whole support system, and put him in foster care. And they were accusing us of things that didn't happen.
The system has allowed this child to be kidnapped from his home, and there's nothing, even having a Dr. Block say, hey, there was nothing here. DHS can ignore that kind of stuff? The answer is yes, they can, because they operate on a different set of rules. They operate behind a cloak of privacy. They can do whatever they want.
The ironic thing is, in one of the forensic interviews, and this is all documented, our grandson said that somebody in his foster family hurt him. They ignored that statement and went past it to try to find out information on us, redirected the questions. They never investigated that allegation. He never said he was hurt in our home.
He said he wasn't hurt in our home ever. Actually.
So we're fighting a DHS that has no accountability, no transparency. We were court ordered not to contact our grandson, but once the charges were dropped, that court order went away. DHS has never served us, but we hear through the grapevine that we have a protective order against us not to see him. We've never been notified and we've never been told. So we don't know it even exists. But the judge has said on this open court that she's going to do everything in her power to make sure that Clayton never sees us again.
Not being able to have contact with him, never ever once being allowed to have contact with him privately as his mother, in a mother-son situation.
Years later, we're still trying to get him back, and we just put up these billboards with, your family will never stop fighting for you is what we put on them, because we just want him to know if he's on the bus all the way to school and he passes a billboard and sees that, please know we love you.
We had multiple witnesses come to us telling us, hey, your son is in a really bad situation, living situation. He's being mistreated, he's being locked up, were those exact words. I believe some of their exact words were, he is claiming that he's running away and claiming that he wants to kill himself if he has to be sent back to the family that he's currently with, his foster mom.
Billboards on the site and in the community share the message, your family will never stop fighting for you. The family just recently posted yard signs with that same message where the child lives with his foster mom. The Woolley family says a neighbor saw the sign, went to the website, and sent this message last week. Quote, he plays with my son and his living situation isn't good at all. He's constantly trying to run away from those people and tried several times to hide over here, and they've had police pick him up. He says he's locked up and can never play with anyone. I hope you get him back.
I filed for an emergency custody hearing, which they're supposed to have within 72 hours, and they haven't had it at all.
Well, my wife was holding him. He had said that he didn't want to go back there. He wanted to go live somewhere else. He hated it there. They're not nice to him there. He better kill himself.
They owe this child and this family a reunification. They owe them apologies. This couple has spent immense money defending themselves. And this child, I don't know how much therapy could ever help him now. I don't know how this family still can wake up and be as faithful and as hopeful as sometimes they are when they've been absolutely brutalized.
4.5 years later, we're pretty much in the beginning stages of if you were to fight to get your kid back at any point in time, or no matter who you are, we've just been put back to the beginning again.
Been over 4 years now. I haven't worked. We've had to use all our retirement.
For a long time, we were just afraid to even come out of our house because at one point, the sheriff got in the air before the charge was even leveled. He said, somebody in that house killed that baby, we know that. So the threats really picked up and we started having death threats as well.
And during the whole process, my father had passed away. We used up almost all of his inheritance that we received to live on. And to pay attorneys, we've had to hire, I think it's been about 16 different attorneys because of all the different ways they've attacked our family.
We haven't been able to get jobs because of this being on our record, so it's killed our livelihood. You know, we've had to sell off almost everything that we have. Our home was paid off, so it's devastated us in that regard.
If you go back to just the beginning and going through all of it, and obviously it's been a few years now, but that trauma is still there and it's not been resolved yet. And you know, like being a senior in high school and having your parents taken away from you and watching them be put in, you know, cuffs and taken from you, and then being removed from your own home, because I mean, I was removed from my home because I was 17 at the time and forced to not see my family and all this stuff. And then when they were arrested, having to see them through glass, and you only get to see one every other week. So, you know, you go 2 weeks into seeing a parent and you get 10 minutes with them through glass and a phone. And mind you, that 10 minutes is shared with everyone else who wants to see them, not just you. And it's incredibly hard. Yeah, like it's just, that's something that probably will take, you know, years and years and years of therapy to officially get through. And I don't even think that I've begun to start going through all that trauma yet, just because Clayton's still gone. And I don't think anyone quite understands that like, even though your name's cleared, like, he's gone. The hardest thing that's ever happened in my life is not my parents being arrested, not even Elijah dying, it's Clayton being taken. So, really hard. And like my parents not being there for high school graduation, 18th birthday, winning state title, winning national title, all of that stuff, like prom, like just like all the stuff you want your parents for, like was really, really, really hard and traumatic, but it doesn't even like pale in comparison to the fact that like Clayton and Elijah were my whole world. They were my parents' whole world, and they're gone. And Clayton's living in the same city and knowing I can't see him is like the craziest thing ever.
Going through all of this and then having to try to process the fact that I lost a son to him passing away, and then losing another son to DHS taking him away. And not just losing my children, I also lost my parents. I was told I couldn't have contact with them by multiple times, multiple different people telling me that, including judges, and of course my DHS worker. And I was even threatened multiple times to not see my parents, to cut off my family is pretty much what I was being told to do. In the beginning of this case, kind of in the first year, I was told I couldn't see my son, right? And all I want to do is see my son. That's what I've been fighting for this whole time, is to see my son. And I saw him in Walmart. I was going into Walmart and I just saw him. And I knew it was Clayton. And then I saw the foster mom, so absolutely it's Clayton. And I knew that I couldn't see him because of what they said to me, telling me I wasn't allowed to see him, but I also knew that seeing him and him seeing me would want to make him go home, and he would say, can I go home? I was scared he was gonna ask me if I would take him with me, and I'd have to tell him no.
And she'd showed me a video of her, like she's hiding from Clayton. She took a video of him like this. She had taken a picture of Clayton, and she is like crying and miserable and isn't going over there and talking to him because she knows she's not allowed to, but she's torn inside. As a mom, you would want to run over there. She's thinking, oh my gosh, I gotta get this baby back. What in the world? Like, I don't even know what I would do.
So I didn't see him. I didn't go and talk to him. I didn't let him know I was there. I just hid behind an aisle and I videotaped him. But I didn't get to say hi. I didn't get to let him know that I was there. And the whole time I haven't gotten to let him know that we love him and that we're fighting for him and that we didn't forget about him, that he's not forgotten, and that we want him so badly. And if it was up, he'd be with us if we had any control over it.
But like, I've told my parents and I've told people too. I remember telling my best friend, I was like, if I am getting to the point where I actually am gonna get married and all this, and I was like, I don't know if I can until he's back. Stuff that seems far down the road, but it's like, I can't move on with certain parts of my life until he's back. I see comments all the time on the news articles that are like, why was he with the grandparents? Like, where was the parents? Like, we were. And it's like, he wasn't just their grandson and my nephew. He was our kid. We raised those boys. They were our babies. And they don't seem to understand, but I'm like, it was harder losing Clayton because, like I said, Elijah is safe. He is in heaven. He is good. And it sucks because I'm never going to see him again, and it's traumatic. But I know that if he was taken, I trust you, God, that was his time. But with Clayton, it's like, he's just gone. And as hard as it is for me to not have him, I can't even begin to wrap my brain around how hard it is to be kidnapped from your family for years. And what takes place in that time. And not just years as a teenager where it would be hard, but you can understand the situation. But years as a 5-year-old on, in that time, my first memories were when I was 3, 4, some people 4 or 5. The formidable time that he has taken, it's the most crucial time in his life where he needs the most emotional support to be developed into what kind of human being he's going to be the rest of his life. And in that time, he's kidnapped, he's taken with not only no family, it's not just my parents and me, it's all extended family and every single person that he ever saw their face. You're talking people at church, you're talking his kid friends at school. He was moved schools, he was moved churches, he was moved, every single aspect of your life, if you can imagine, not just your family, not just your friends, but every single interaction you ever had with a human being, you never saw that face ever again.
It took a whole big hit on our health, obviously. I had a massive heart attack, my heart gave out. And I know I'm getting stronger and better, but I guess I died 12 times. And they brought me back 12 times, so that tells me that I'm supposed to still be here. And when the doctor came in and asked me if I'd made the arrangements with hospice yet, I was devastated. It was like, are you kidding me? No, I'm not going anywhere. I've got a grandson to fight for. I'm so grateful that I decided to live and not die, because all my checkups now for the last 5 or 6 months have just been getting better and better and better. And so I feel like I've been given my life back.
Elijah, like, he's gone, but I know he's in a better place, and Clayton's not. Like, he's with these people that don't care about him. You know, people say, like, how have you not stopped fighting? And it's like, how could we stop fighting? Like, we'll never stop. It'll never happen. All we care about is getting him back. And there's been, obviously, like, we've been completely financially wrecked, mentally wrecked, you know, emotionally wrecked, but it's him. That's what we care about.
I just want you guys just to gather around and just lay hands on the family. Want to come here and just lay hands on them and just pray strength and endurance over them.